Hi, thank you for taking the time to watch the Safe Food for Canadians Regulations presentation, specifically for the fresh fruit and vegetables sector. Today we will be talking about the key milestones of the Safe Food for Canadians Act and its regulations, the benefits of the Safe Food for Canadians Regulations, or SFCR, for the fresh fruits and vegetables sector. We will also cover licensing, preventive controls, and traceability. Under preventive controls, we will look more closely at identification and analysis of hazards, maintenance and operations of establishments, investigation, notification, complaints, and recall, the requirements to have a preventive control plan, also known as PCP. We will provide a summary of how the requirements apply to importing and exporting fresh fruit or vegetables. We will touch upon what to expect when you are inspected and what additional resources are available. Throughout the presentation, we have provided you with definitions of key terms in blue text boxes to help you better understand the requirements. We will also point to key guidance documents that are available on the CFIA website. Let's talk about key milestones and benefits. Throughout the development of the SFCR, CFIA worked hand in hand with the Canadian Produce Marketing Association, CPMA, the Canadian Horticultural Council, CHC, and Canada GAP to make sure the new regulations would be applicable to this sector. As you may all know, in January 2019, the SFCR came into force for all food that is exported or traded interprovincially. The licensing and traceability requirements also came into force for those in this sector who manufacture, process, treat, preserve, grade, package, label, or import fresh fruits or vegetables. On January 15, 2020, the preventive controls, including PCPs, and the lot code labeling requirements will come into force for all fresh fruit or vegetable businesses, including growers and harvesters. Furthermore, growers and harvesters will now have to comply with the traceability requirements. Benefits of the SFCR specific to the fresh fruits and vegetables sector include removal of dual licensing, leveling the playing field by removing the shipping point inspections for apples, potatoes, and blueberries from certain provinces, and licensing businesses that import or manufacture, process, treat, preserve, grade, package, or label for interprovincial trade or export. And finally, we know that the fresh fruits and vegetables sector has been waiting for this. The grade standards and requirements have been incorporated by reference to allow for easier and smoother revisions. Let's talk about licensing requirements specifically for the fresh fruit or vegetable sector. Licensing came into force on January 15, 2019 for all fresh fruit or vegetable businesses, including growers and harvesters who grade, package, repackage, or label, treat, for example, fumigation or ethylene treatment, minimally process, for example, coring, shredding, fresh cutting, packaging and labeling in the field if the fresh fruits or vegetables will not be subsequently manufactured, processed, treated, preserved, or graded by a license holder. Import and export if an export certificate is requested from CFIA. Fresh fruits or vegetables are defined in the SFCR as any fresh plant or any fresh edible fungus or any part of such a plant or fungus that is a food. This includes any fresh fruits, vegetables, herbs, mushrooms, nuts, and sprouts. The fresh fruits or vegetables may be wild or cultivated in a field, facility, or building. Let's take a quick moment to clear some confusion between the Safe Food for Canadians license requirement and the DRC membership. The purpose of the Safe Food for Canadians license is to identify businesses that import or manufacture, process, treat, preserve, grade, package, or label food for interprovincial trade or export, and to authorize those businesses to carry out those activities. The DRC membership serves to ensure fair and ethical trading practices by minimizing trade irritants and facilitating effective trade dispute resolution. Many fresh fruit or vegetable businesses will need both a Safe Food for Canadians license and a membership with the DRC. Here's a list of key guidance materials and resources to help you navigate your way through licensing. Let's move on to preventive controls, the main focus of this presentation. Preventive controls are found in Part 4 of the SFCR. These requirements will be coming into force for fresh fruits or vegetables on January 15, 2020. They are outcome-based to allow for flexibility and innovation. They are based on the internationally recognized principles of food hygiene, including good manufacturing practices and good agricultural practices. They help to prevent food safety hazards and reduce the likelihood of contaminated food entering the market, whether they are prepared within or outside of Canada. Preventive controls apply to operators. For fresh fruits or vegetables, this means those who have a license, as well as growers and harvesters who export or trade across provincial and territorial boundaries. Although in many cases the market drove the fresh fruits and vegetable sector to implement food safety, there was no government oversight in the eyes of consumers and our international trading partners. As mentioned in the previous slide, the preventive control requirements are outcome-based where possible to allow for flexibility and innovation. Please take note that outcome-based regulations do not lower food safety standards or allow you to cut corners. While CFIA is open to innovation, we will be vigilant in verifying high standards of food safety. Preventive controls include identification and analysis of hazards, maintenance and operation requirements, investigation, notification, complaints, and recalls. We will go into more detail into each of these in the next few slides. Let's talk about identification and analysis of hazards as part of preventive control. For each identified biological, chemical, and physical hazard that presents a risk of contamination to the fresh fruits or vegetables, the SFCR requires that you analyze the hazard, use control measures to prevent, eliminate, or reduce it to an acceptable level, and have evidence to show that the control measure is effective. Conducting a hazard analysis is usually associated with having a written food safety system, such as Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Points, or HACCP. However, under the SFCR, even if a written preventive control plan is not required, a hazard analysis, the use of control measures, and validation of their effectiveness is still required. As mentioned in the previous slide, your control measures must be shown by evidence to be effective. This is also known as validation. Validation is an important activity to ensure your preventive controls meet the outcomes identified in the regulations. The definition of validation is based on the Codex definition, the process of obtaining evidence that a control measure or combination of control measures, if properly implemented, is capable of controlling the hazard to a specified outcome. If you have in place control measures that were validated and found to be acceptable before the SFCR came into force, you do not need to revalidate them. However, revalidation is required if you have made changes to the control measure or if you have found repeated failures or deviations. The validation you conduct on the control measures should be proportional to the level of risk. This means that evidence could be very simple, for example, good hygiene practices or prerequisite programs, be more detailed, so for example, known critical control points, or require a full validation study because the control measure is new. Always make sure that the type of evidence you choose is relevant to your particular hazard. There is industry guidance on our website that explains validation and what is meant by proven to be effective. Let's talk about maintenance and operation of establishment as part of preventive controls. Specifically, sanitation, pest control and non-food agents, conditions of the establishment, unloading, loading, and storing, competency, and hygiene. To prevent the contamination of fresh fruits or vegetables, it is crucial that the following are kept clean and in a sanitary condition. The establishment where you manufacture, prepare, store, package, or label fresh fruit and vegetables. This also includes the facility or field where you grow or harvest fresh fruit or vegetables, and any conveyance or equipment that you use within the establishment. Conveyance or equipment is anything that you use in the establishment to transport, grow, harvest, process, treat, grade, package, or label the fresh fruit or vegetables. Examples include trucks or trailers used in the field where fresh fruit or vegetables are grown or harvested, conveyor belts, mesh bags, and wires. In addition to maintaining the cleanliness of the establishment and conveyances or equipment, you need to make sure that the cleaning and sanitizing activities do not contaminate the fresh fruits or vegetables. You are required to protect the establishment, facility or conveyance, and the land that forms part of the establishment against the entry of animals that present a risk of contamination to the fresh fruits or vegetables. Animals include vermin, rodents, mammals, insects, and birds. With respect to the field where you grow or harvest fresh fruits or vegetables, use reasonable measures to prevent the entry of animals onto the field. Also, make sure that the measures you use do not contaminate the fresh fruits or vegetables. This requirement has to do with the identification, suitability, handling, and use of non-food chemicals, sanitizers, and agronomic inputs so that the fresh fruits or vegetables do not become contaminated. The identification of non-food chemicals, sanitizers, and agronomic inputs can be through the use of labels, color coding the containers, or other means, as long as you can make sure that they are well identified so that they are not accidentally misused. The next set of requirements are around conveyances or equipment that you use in the establishment to prevent contamination of fresh fruits or vegetables. Specifically, these requirements address the functioning, design, construction, and maintenance, conditions and use of conveyances or equipment. Remember, the establishment is any place, including a field, where you manufacture, prepare, including grow or harvest, store, package or label fresh fruits or vegetables. Examples of conveyances or equipment include trucks, trailers and wagons used to transport fresh fruit or vegetables in the field where they are grown or harvested, mesh bags, wires, clips, ladders, stakes, elastic bands, gutters, chemical applicators used for growing or harvesting fresh fruit or vegetables, dump tanks or wash tanks, and conveyors. These requirements have to do with the establishment where you manufacture, prepare, including grow or harvest, store, package or label the fresh fruits or vegetables. Examples include a facility, conveyance, or land where any of those activities are conducted. Most of these requirements are written in an outcome-based manner. It is your responsibility as the operator to determine if there is a risk of contamination to fresh fruits or vegetables, and if yes, determine how you will make sure that those risks are mitigated. An interesting outcome-based requirement is the one about water, steam, and ice. It requires that water that may come into contact with fresh fruit or vegetables be potable unless there is no risk of contamination. For example, growers and harvesters need to make sure that the water they use for irrigation is not a source of contamination for the fresh fruits or vegetables. Another outcome-based requirement is the separation of incompatible activities and incompatible food. If there is a risk of contamination to fresh fruits or vegetables, you need to separate any incompatible activities from each other and any incompatible food. Let's talk about facilities or conveyances. Examples include packing sheds, sprout facilities, mushroom production facilities, greenhouses, and fresh cut facilities. In addition to complying with the establishment requirements, facilities or conveyances must also comply with the following: sanitary design to prevent the accumulation of substances presenting a risk of contamination, for example, dust, food particles, etc. Size and layout to accommodate the activity conducted and equipment used. Design, construction, and maintenance to prevent the entry of animals including vermin, rodents, mammals, insects, and birds. Floors, walls, ceilings, windows, and doors designed not to present a risk of contamination. Material used in its construction and maintenance that are suitable and appropriate. Ventilation system that provides sufficient air exchange for clean air and removal of odors. Temperature and humidity control that is appropriate for the activities being conducted. Control of movement of persons and things. A few examples of things include food, non-food chemicals, agronomic inputs, starter products, packaging material, and equipment or conveyances. As the operator, it is your responsibility to make sure that conveyances that arrive and leave the establishment comply with these requirements. In addition, the manner in which the food is loaded and unloaded from the establishment must not contaminate the fresh fruits or vegetables. And let's not forget about the manner of storing fresh fruits or vegetables and non-food items. Non-food items include conveyances or equipment, sanitizers and chemical agents, agronomic inputs and starter products, packaging material and labels, and other things used to manufacture, prepare, including grow or harvest, store, package or label the fresh fruits or vegetables. Competencies and qualifications of employees, including contractors and international farm workers, are important for supporting food safety awareness and safe handling practices and mitigating hazards that may contaminate the fresh fruits or vegetables. Good hygiene is crucial to food safety. As the operator, it is your responsibility to make sure that any person who enters or is in an area where the fresh fruits or vegetables are manufactured, prepared, including grown or harvested, stored, packaged or labeled, maintains good hygiene. This includes maintaining personal cleanliness, such as hand cleaning and, if necessary, sanitizing, and making sure that the following do not present a risk of contamination to the fresh fruits or vegetables: clothing, footwear and protective coverings, the wearing and use of objects and substances, and personal behavior such as spitting, chewing gum, and other acts. As the operator, you also have to make sure that any person who works in an area where the fresh fruit or vegetables are manufactured, prepared, including grown or harvested, stored, packaged or labeled, who has a disease, illness, symptom of a disease or illness, or any open or infected lesion, reports it to you. And you determine if there is a risk of contamination to the fresh fruits or vegetables. If there is, you are required to exclude them from those areas. Let's talk about investigation, notification, complaints, and recall as part of preventive controls. As the operator, if you suspect that a fresh fruit or vegetable may present a risk of injury to human health, or does not meet the acts or regulations, you are obliged to investigate the matter immediately. If you determine that there is a risk of injury to human health, you are required to immediately notify CFIA and take action to mitigate the risk. You are also required to prepare, keep, and maintain a procedure for receiving, investigating, and responding to complaints. And whenever you receive a complaint related to the fresh fruits or vegetables, you implement that procedure. As the operator, regardless of your gross annual food income, you are required to keep documents of the complaint procedure, the details of the complaint, the results of your investigation, and the actions you have taken. These documents are to be kept for at least 2 years after completing the actions you have taken as a result of your investigation. Recall refers to the removal of a food from further sale or use, or the correction of its label, at any point in the supply chain as a risk mitigation action. CFIA created guidance to help you prepare your procedure to carry out effective recalls. Remember, you are required to conduct a recall simulation at least once every 12 months. Similar to the requirements regarding complaints, regardless of your gross annual food income, you are required to keep documents of the recall procedures, including contact person for the procedure and person responsible for conducting recalls, the details and results of the recall simulation, and the details of any recall you conducted and evidence of its effectiveness. These documents also need to be kept for at least 2 years after the recall was initiated. Here's a list of key guidance materials and resources to help you navigate your way through preventive controls. Let's move on to the next transitional component, requirement to have a written preventive control plan, or PCP. A PCP is a written document that demonstrates how risks to food, including fresh fruit or vegetables, and food animals, are identified and controlled. The controls are based on internationally recognized principles of Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point, or HACCP. Essentially, the written PCP includes the details of the preventive controls discussed in the previous slides. However, if your gross annual food sales is $100,000 or less, you are not required to prepare, keep, and maintain a PCP. Regardless of whether you have a PCP or not, you must still comply with the preventive controls, as well as the document requirements related to complaints and recalls. If you have a HACCP system in place, you are well positioned to show compliance with the PCP requirements as they relate to food safety. Review your system to make sure that it meets all the PCP requirements, including those related to consumer protection, such as packaging, labeling, and grading. For food safety, the written preventive control plan must include a description of each biological, chemical, and physical hazard, control measures to prevent, eliminate, or reduce the hazards to an acceptable level, evidence that the control measures are effective, a description of the critical control points, or CCP. For each CCP, a description of the control measure that is applied and evidence that it is effective, a description of the critical limit, the monitoring procedures in relation to the critical limit, and the corrective action procedures if the critical limit is not met. You must also keep documents that prove you have implemented your PCP for 2 years after the day on which you prepared them. Your PCP must also include the information you used to identify the hazards. It must capture the information you used to determine the appropriate control measures, the critical control points, the related control measures and critical limits, and the appropriate monitoring procedure and corrective action procedures. There is no retention period for these supporting documents because they should always be current and available. For the consumer protection portion, your PCP must include a description of the measures you take to make sure that the fresh fruit and vegetables comply with the specified consumer protection requirements, for example, labeling, grading, and are packaged and labeled in a manner that is not false, misleading, or deceptive, or likely to create an erroneous impression. The PCP must also include the documents that show you are using those measures. For example, label verification checklists, net quantity determination records, and grading records. Here's a list of key guidance materials and resources to help you navigate your way through the Preventive Control Plan requirements. Please note that similar resources have been developed for importers, which will be discussed further in this presentation. Let's talk about traceability requirements. The traceability requirements align with Codex International Standards. They support food safety investigations, including recalls, reduce the time it takes to remove unsafe food from the market, and they minimize the scope of recalls, therefore reducing the cost for businesses. The traceability requirements in the SFCR apply to a much broader scope of food businesses than licensing and preventive controls. For FFV, it applies to license holders, for example, packers, including those who package in the field, fresh cut operators and importers, growers and harvesters who export or trade interprovincially, businesses whose sole activity is interprovincial trade or export, for example, wholesalers and distributors, and retail. There are two components to traceability, specifically document requirements and labeling requirements. There are three main pieces of information that you need to prepare and keep in a document. The first piece of information is used to identify the fresh fruits or vegetables you provide using its common name, the name and principal place of business by whom or for whom the fresh fruits or vegetables were manufactured, prepared, produced, stored, packaged, or labeled, and the lot code or unique identifier to allow them to be traced. The next piece of information is used to trace back the fresh fruits or vegetables and any other ingredients you used to prepare the fresh fruit and vegetables. Specifically, the date on which they were provided to you and by whom it was provided. And the last piece of information is used to trace forward the fresh fruits or vegetables. So, the date you provide the fresh fruit or vegetables and to whom you provided them. Trace forward does not apply to the sale of fresh fruit or vegetables to consumers. The second component to traceability is labeling. You are required to make sure that the fresh fruits or vegetables you provide to another person have a label with the following information applied, attached, or accompanying them: the common name, the name and principal place of business by whom or for whom the fresh fruits or vegetables were manufactured, prepared, produced, stored, packaged, or labeled, and a lot code or unique identifier. However, do note for consumer prepackages, it must be a lot code. To give you a little bit of background, Unique Identifier was added based on comments received at Canada Gazette Part 1 to provide flexibility for food that is not packaged in consumer prepackages. Therefore, a unique identifier is used to identify a defined quantity of food. It could be a lot code, purchase order number, or bill of lading. While a lot code is used to identify a quantity of food that was manufactured, prepared, produced, stored, graded, packaged, or labeled under similar conditions. Examples include production date, best before date, establishment number, and Safe Food for Canadians license number. Further examples for fresh fruits or vegetables include harvest date, grower ID, growing region, or any other code that may be used for traceability purposes. The traceability labeling requirements take into consideration the labeling exceptions in Part 12 of the SFCR. Here's a list of key guidance materials and resources to help you navigate your way through the traceability requirements. Let's take a closer look at the SFCR requirements related to importing fresh fruits or vegetables into Canada. These new regulations apply to all imported fresh fruits or vegetables. As of January 15, 2019, importers were required to obtain a Safe Food for Canadians, or SFC, license. Importers operating without a license are advised to apply as soon as possible in order to comply with the regulations. Importing fresh fruits or vegetables without a license may result in delays with your shipment at the border. Under the SFCR, a person who imports is the person identified by industry as performing the activity of importing, and only the person importing requires the license. If you are the importer, while you can hire a broker to help facilitate the import process, you need to hold the license. The declaration information for imported fresh fruit or vegetable shipments must include your license number for each shipment. As part of your license, you are required to comply with certain preventive control requirements, namely hazard identification, analysis and control measures, investigation, notification and recalls, and if your gross annual food sales are greater than $100,000, you also need a written preventive control plan. As an importer, you are also required to comply with the traceability requirements, have a DRC membership unless you are exempt. It is also encouraged that your foreign supplier be a member of the DRC, and comply with the import requirements for fresh fruits or vegetables. These are found in Part 6, Division 6 of the SFCR. The import restrictions for blackberries from Guatemala, cantaloupes from Mexico, and leafy greens from California and Arizona continue to apply. The Automated Import Reference System, or AIRS, has been updated to reflect SFCR requirements. A non-resident importer, also referred to as NRI, is a person that imports food into Canada whose fixed place of business is located in a country other than Canada. NRIs can apply for a license to import as long as their fixed place of business is located in a country recognized by CFIA as having at least the same level of protection as that of Canada for the food being imported. Currently, for fresh fruits or vegetables, the only foreign country where there is a food safety system recognition arrangement in place is the United States. Therefore, the United States is the only foreign country that is eligible for NRI status for the import of fresh fruits or vegetables. For example, an NRI located in the United States would not be able to import fresh grapes directly to Canada from any country other than the United States. The grapes would have to be imported into the United States, where it would be subject to U.S. government oversight before it is sent to Canada. The NRI needs to meet the same requirements as Canadian importers. Please note, foreign fresh fruit or vegetable businesses cannot obtain a license for the fresh fruit or vegetables they export to Canada. Only the person importing the fresh fruits or vegetables into Canada is to have the license. This includes importers with a fixed place in Canada or non-resident importers with a fixed place of business in the United States. Here's a list of key guidance materials and resources to help you navigate your way through import requirements. If you are new to importing or just want a general overview of importing food into Canada, we recommend you start with the step-by-step guide. To determine the import requirements for a specific type of food, the AIRS tool continues to be your best resource. The CFIA's National Import Service Center continues to be available if there are questions about CFIA's import requirements. Let's take a look at what the SFCR means for exporters. As an exporter, you are required to meet both the Canadian as well as the foreign country requirements. If the fresh fruit or vegetables do not meet Canadian requirements, you must have written documents that prove that foreign requirements are met, and the fresh fruits or vegetables are labeled for export. You must make sure that any manufacturing, processing, treating, preserving, grading, packaging, or labeling of the fresh fruits or vegetables in Canada is conducted by a license holder. And if you are exporting imported fresh fruit or vegetables, that it was imported by a license holder. You must also have a DRC membership unless you are exempt. It is also encouraged that your foreign customer be a member of the DRC. If you would like to obtain an export certificate from CFIA, you need to have a Safe Food for Canadians license, a written preventive control plan, and you need to be complying with the traceability requirements. To facilitate export, CFIA created a registry of licensed food businesses that are in good regulatory standing, who meet licensing, preventive controls, and traceability. Here's a list of key guidance materials and resources to help you navigate your way through exports. The step-by-step guide and general requirements for exporters are excellent starting points. The export eligibility lists have also been carried forward so that information will continue to be available. Let's move on to what to expect when you are inspected. The type, frequency, and extent of CFIA's oversight activities for your business will be proportional to the risks that need to be managed. The purpose of an inspection is to assess whether a food business meets the legislative requirements and conditions of a license or other permission, for example, an export certificate. You will see that CFIA verifies compliance by conducting a range of inspection activities. These inspection activities can include making visual observations, interviewing personnel, sampling, measuring or testing, and evaluating documentation. CFIA has developed an infographic on what to expect before, during, and after an inspection. Here's some additional information for you to be aware of. Although we mainly focused on licensing, preventive controls, PCP, and traceability, there are other requirements in the SFCR that you also need to meet. These already came into force in January 2019. From the food landing page, you can click on the links Labeling, Standards of Identity and Grades, and Food-Specific Requirements and Guidance for guidance material on these requirements. If you have an immediate question in relation to the licensing application, please call our 1-800 number and an agent will help you through the process. For all other inquiries, please use the Contact Us form found on CFIA's website. We also encourage you to stay connected by signing up to receive our email notifications, following us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook,